Hi everyone, and welcome to the Friday, February 25th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman, technology reporter for NBC Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson, our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Well, I think we have one topic today, Scott, I really do. I mean, there's various things going on. I mean, Samsung shipped 100 million buggy phones, apparently, and Reddit is adding a new platform so you can actually search the place. That's about it, other than the Ukraine. It's got to be the absolute center of attention, not only in the world, but in Silicon Valley. There are so many implications for the Valley right now.
Yeah, it's an amazing story that has very much today, minute-to-minute update value. And if you're a historian of World War II or
Yes.
even past wars, there are historical ghosts to this as well. It's really wide-ranging.
And some of them aren't even being talked about. I mean, this is what Hitler did with Czechoslovakia. Oh, I only want the Sudetenland. I'll leave it right there. And then nobody called him on it. And he kept going. Now, is Putin Hitler? I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen a history of the Soviet Union trying to attack too far beyond their borders. But we also see a lot of revanchism, like we own this area back to 900 AD, so it belongs to us, and we're going to slowly take it back.
Right, which is echoes of Germany in World War II expanding and taking what it thought was theirs because
which is in eastern Ukraine, Austria, which is, well, they all speak Russian here.
Right.
There are people, so we get them back. But the Baltics have to be terrified right now.
Any so-called breakaway republic has to be because of those World War II echoes and because of Putin, who has spoken out within the last couple of days saying, this is ours,
yes,
and we deserve it, and we should take it back, and that's nerve-rattling.
Yeah, and when you saw, I thought you were going to say Nuremberg, which no, there's an element of that. This speech he gave earlier this week justifying this invasion was an utter lie. But the Russian people seem to have accepted. I'm not sure. There's obviously no polling in Russia, but this is the 21st century. They have access to the world. Are the Russian people buying all this?
I don't know, and anything would be idle speculation. We have seen protests, not only in Moscow, but even in St. Petersburg. I don't know. I really don't want to speculate on any of this because especially there's so much misinformation.
But now here's what Putin knows. When he went into the Crimea, his ratings went up.
Right.
Through the roof. And I wonder if he thinks this is going to happen again.
I mean, there's a significant number of people, both in Russia and even here, that say Putin is a good leader because he leads with a strong hand, a strong fist.
Yeah, now we're back in the 30s.
Well, right, and that's a population who is convinced they are the underdog, even when they are a very powerful nation.
Right. Another thing that's not being discussed is the Ukraine don't have a lot of, in the Ukraine, most of the Ukraine doesn't have a lot of love for Russia. I mean, they're still, they remember the Holodomor much more than the rest of the world does. And when they talk about, well, there's so many native Russians in eastern Ukraine speaking Russian and all that. You know why? Because the Holodomor killed 10 million, starved to death on purpose, 10 million native Ukrainians. And Stalin moved Russian citizens into the Ukraine. And then a few years later, he moved the Tartars into that part of Ukraine too. So to say it's, that they love us and they're always been part of us. No, they killed millions of people and then replaced them with Russians. I mean, the whole thing is turning into this giant who believes what story exercise.
Right. There's a lot of history. There are many immigrants here in this country who are here because Russia kicked them out.
Yeah.
And that can be traced right back to Ukraine and Kyiv.
So what do you think? What happens from here on out? Does he take the Ukraine, or does he just go in, captures Kyiv, arrests the government, or drives them out of the country into exile, and then puts in a puppet? Because that's what he had before Zelensky. remember, he had Yanukovych, I think was the guy's name, who was very pro-Russian. Is that what he just wants? Is another buffer state?
I don't know. I mean, we're not qualified really to speculate, and minute by minute this is changing. So by the time we put this out there, something different.
Something else will have happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the larger penumbra of effects of all of this. I got a quick note from Grove as the attack started, and he said, "This is going to be a green light to China on Taiwan." And I'm starting to hear that from other places too, that China's watching all this. You know, Xi and his buddy Putin holding hands at the Olympics. You think this sets a precedent that, you know, we keep going back to the late 30s, but, you know, if Japan goes into Manchuria and then, you know, Hitler and Mussolini go, wow, nobody stopped them. They just let it go. Is this what's going to happen here, you think? I mean, obviously China's not going to go into Taiwan. They flew a bunch of planes in this week, encroached on Taiwan airspace. But Xi's got the Party Congress coming up later this year. So he's probably not going to do anything until early next year. But is this a green light?
I mean, I don't know. Again, you're talking geopolitics, and that changes literally by the minute.
It's above our pay grade, but
right, and even if you do go back to the 30s again, yes, some things were unchecked until they were checked, until the world went to war. Is that ultimately what we want here? I would argue no. But that's what ultimately checked the dictators.
Do dictators listen to sanctions?
Well, I don't know, but ultimately they do have to listen to their people.
Yes.
I mean, Russia's famous for not, but, you know, again, right, these are geopolitical concerns, and sanctions are sanctions, and Putin, it's a modern era. You can even lead as a strong, you know, iron-fisted dictator, but if your people are starving, the rest of the world will know, and you're not popular. And so you have to think about that as well.
You know, Tad, my oldest son, watching all this today, I think it was Socrates he quoted, it may have been Plato, but he said, only the dead really know peace. That we thought that we were entering into this sort of Pax Americana, Pax globalism, whatever it was, that territorial wars were seen to be out of date, that we were just going to fight cyber wars and that sort of thing.
I don't know. I mean, that's going on
and
too.
Here we got troops on the move again and missiles, you know,
right. I mean,
firing.
I don't buy that we're entering into a Pax whatever, because dictators will always be dictators. Strong-handed leaders will always be.
There's always bad guys out there, bad actors.
Right.
Okay, so you sent me a list of numbers that kind of boggled my mind. And this is before Russia goes into Ukraine. So far this year, Tesla has lost $455 billion in stock market value. Microsoft has lost $440 billion. Facebook has lost $414 billion. And this one surprised me. Apple has lost $360 billion in value.
Well, all four of those were trillion-dollar companies, and in the last, you know, in Microsoft's and Apple case, multi-trillion-dollar companies.
Yeah, this is a pretty big retreat.
Well, it really is. This is something I tweeted out to show just how far from the highs the market has come because of inflationary concerns, because of, you know, concerns about Russia and what it might do. And, you know, the economy is taking a step back after getting really frothy. That's the word we always use. And, you know, this is.
But I don't see a bounce back this time. Not with this going on.
Well, look, I mean, the overall economy is still pretty strong. We're still creating jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think things just got ahead of itself. People were so over the pandemic, and by people I mean investors. They were looking at the earning reports, which were strong. They were looking at the job numbers, which were strong, and they said, well, we're even going to rally in a time of a global pandemic.
Yeah.
But you know, part of the problem of a pandemic is fewer people are at work. That hurts the supply chain, and people are less likely to say, I'm going to invest. I'm going to buy stocks when they can't find produce at the grocery store, or when they can't find a job, or when they feel their wages are too low. And we've started to get that feeling of maybe things just got a little ahead of themselves. And that was even before Vladimir Putin goes into Ukraine.
I mean, last week was a bad week for the stock market.
Right.
This week, the moment the word got out that the Russians across the Ukrainian border, stock market fell, what, 600 points?
Instantly,
800
the
points?
futures did, right.
Yeah.
And then they fell even more the next day, and we had oil up above $100 for the first time in years.
105 last I looked.
Right, and that means not only you, the commuter, will pay more at the gas pump, but transportation costs will go up. And again, that means higher prices for everything we buy, because everything we buy has to get transported.
And we're having it not here. Well, even here, a little bit in the valley, it's been a cold few days. But in the rest of the country, they are having a really cold winter.
So heating oil is higher.
Yeah, I heard from Grove, heating oil costs for him have tripled. Now, you don't have a lot of disposable income if you're spending it on the guy with the fuel truck showing up once a month.
Right, and if you're into transportation and gas is $5 a gallon, encroaching on $6 a gallon, with a future that could be even higher than that, right, that loses a lot of disposable income as well.
So are we in a recession now? Has the economy stalled? I don't see a simple way out of this. And if these companies have lost this much value, that impacts, it's a fraction of their value, but nevertheless, that's a lot of value that they're losing. And it kind of constrains their ability to act, on things like M&A and salary raises and also in R&D in the long run.
Right. I mean, I will leave that question to the economists. As a reporter who covers business, my big northern star has always been jobs.
Yeah.
And so are we in a recession? We're not losing jobs. These companies that we just mentioned, they're losing hundreds of billions of dollars in stock market value, again, sort of paper money. They're not laying people off yet. And so that's good news. People still have their jobs. Remember how high these valuations got.
Yeah, they were insane.
Record highs. Yeah, and so there is just a gigantic question mark, a gigantic cloud hanging over everything because of what Putin is doing.
Right.
And what do markets dislike more than anything? Uncertainty. So I have no idea what we're going into, and that's bad news because there's so much uncertainty hanging over everything right now.
Well, we should thank our lucky stars that these giant companies stayed in the valley. I mean, they had a choice a few years ago whether to stay there, keep their headquarters here, or move elsewhere. I mean, obviously Tesla did. But in my experience over all these years, when we have a downtime like this, the corporate offices don't get hurt. They start laying off at the outlying divisions. Intel with a plant in Oregon and, Albuquerque and all of that. And all these companies now are pretty spread out across the country in terms of operations, just because they couldn't get enough people here. Those things will be retracted. I mean, they're going to get hurt first. The notion, we'll bring tech to town. Apple's coming to town. That always sounds good during good times, but during bad times, your town is now dependent upon that one fab over there, and they've just shut it down temporarily. So I think the repercussions aren't going to be as severe in the valley, but they're still going to exist. I mean, there's not going to be as many people buying Ferraris at Los Gatos Ferrari. They're not going to be having that many really expensive dinners downtown San Jose. I mean,
right.
We're just coming out of bad times, and it looks like we're going back into them.
Yeah, and I'm going to be watching the news more to see who's being hurt and killed in Ukraine. I'm not worried about people buying Ferraris right now, and I won't be for the next several weeks. That said, the tech company's right. You often cut capex if you're concerned because of the big question mark. You have a hiring freeze, a salary freeze, et cetera, et cetera. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see that, only because, again, Michael, there's so many question marks hanging over everything right now.
Right. That's the thing about war. You really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly. And that's got to worry, the companies more than the ups and downs of their stock market value. Is just, where do they go from here? We really don't know. The only companies over the last couple of days that have seen their value rise are cybersecurity companies here in the Valley. They've been very busy trying to track the next move of Putin and Russia, known to launch cyber terrorism all over the globe, and advising all of us, which I would say, if you're listening to this, make sure you've got two-factor authorization on your phone, make sure you've got the latest patches on your laptop, because this is a dicey time if maybe I'm not a specific target of a cyber terrorist, but the companies I do business with and the banks I do business with are targets,
right.
And therefore my data is at risk. We should all think that way.
Yeah, when your bank shuts down, you can't do a run on the bank. You can't go down the street to your local, branch office of Wells Fargo and demand money. They don't have any in the safe.
Right.
my interestingly, a glimpse of things to come. About an hour ago, I was on my computer, and my internet went down, and I thought, they're already here.
Right.
It turned out I think it was the cat hit a wire or something. But
sometimes it's a cat hitting a wire, sometimes it's a
but
cyber
it was in the
terrorist.
back.
You should be prepared for both.
Obviously, it was in my mind that we could have that kind of attack. I got a crazy email from some guy who watches cybercurrency, and he said, "Is this the right time to get into cybercurrency as a hedge?" And I thought, how does that work? How do you get to that? How do you make that logical leap?
Well, I mean, look, everyone's looking for an angle. I was interested in looking at what happened as soon as the invasion was real. Oil shot up, as we mentioned. Gold moved a bit higher, that sort of safe haven. You speak of a hedge. Yeah, stocks obviously tumbled. Cryptocurrencies fell quite a bit.
Yeah.
And again, I think...
And this is universal, by the way. I mean, the stock market in the EU fell even more than here.
Right.
And interestingly, the Russian stock market lost half its value in a single morning.
Well, look, I mean, we are, as Thomas Friedman famously wrote, a flat earth.
We're all tied together.
Exactly. And whether you're the strong-arm country or the worried country, we all invest on a very similar plane now on this flat earth, or whatever he called it.
Yeah.
And therefore, whether or not you're cheering for Putin, if you've got money in a stock market, you lost money. And that's the price of war, is all the uncertainty that it causes around the globe. There's no winner and loser here financially, only losers.
We have this notion that a modern country like Russia can go into Ukraine and capture it very quickly. But we also have the example of Vietnam, where, you go, oh, the regime in the South is corrupt and all that, they're going to fall. But, we have insurgencies appearing everywhere in the world. And you can go in, you can take out, Russia should have learned from Afghanistan. You can go in and have Hind helicopters by the hundreds circling the country, and you still can't win the war. Because, now even the rebels have tools, and they have communication skills, and they have, all sorts of stuff. I mean, this could go on. This could be a festering mess. I didn't realize Ukraine's the largest country in Europe.
Second largest.
Behind Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're very powerful economically. They have a huge agriculture presence.
Yes.
One thing that...
Moreover, we've done a lot. Every tech company in the United States is doing business in Ukraine.
Yeah, what's interesting is we talk about startups and where they come from. Are they from Asia? Are they from Israel? Are they from India?
Yeah.
Russia has been slow because of their political stance.
Right.
So you don't see a lot of VC funding. You've seen some recently, but it took them a while for such a big, wealthy country. Ukraine, though, is a little more open. So you see, the WhatsApp guys are from Ukraine. I mean, you see a lot of Ukrainian startups. And also the precious metals from Ukraine, both Russia and Ukraine, are used in what? Computer chips.
Yes.
So, I don't mean to trivialize the fact that there is a war here, but this is likely to make the chip concerns even greater.
Even greater.
Especially if this lasts
I
a long
wonder if we're going to see, we saw in the late 30s, that flight of genius out of Germany that enormously benefited the United States in everything, from science to the arts. Are we going to see the same kind of migration out of the Ukraine, you think? Are we going to see all that tech talent coming here?
I don't know. I mean,
we're obviously being speculative, but this is the time when you do it.
Yeah, that was a very specific migration of people desperate to try to save their lives.
Well,
I don't know if we'll see that from Ukraine, but the Ukraine to America pipeline has been open, correct? Which is why we've seen the tech people come over here and that sort of thing. So I don't know if historically that's an accurate comparison, but people are trying to get out of Ukraine right now.
Right.
And whether they're going into Poland.
Do you see the pictures of all those headlights in the middle of the night coming out of Kiev?
That's scary, and I don't know what to say. It's horrifying and sobering and scary at the same time.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of reading about the pre-war years, in the 30s, which was kind of, there was a depression, but it was still like party, you know, we're going to have peace forever. And I fear that we're going to look back upon, the last 30 years as being another example of partying, looking the other way, ignoring these things, assuming they'll fix themselves. I mean, it's interesting, and maybe the people that are going to look really smart are the chip companies that started opening fab plants in the United States. I mean, if this is a green light to China for Taiwan, we'll be very thankful that we can build fab here. We can build chips here.
Right. I mean, there's always an economic impact in, again, a flat Earth economy that we have. And if we see more, like you say, if this opens the door for more strong-armed leaders to move in and cause even more economic paralysis, you're right. I mean, America first might be America only. Like, we will be developing and counting on our own. The energy prices are going higher, but you saw under the last few presidential administrations the idea of energy independence.
Right.
And that, I think, is going to be something very closely watched and tested if indeed we lose the Russian oil pipelines.
Yes. And we still don't know how Europe's going to react. I mean, they get half of Germany gets half of its, energy from Russia. Are they going to be willing to, get tough? There's indications they won't. And then what happens? Does it break up NATO?
I don't know. I mean, there may be some understanding of that because of their dependence on Russian oil and energy and things like that.
But I mean, the whole point of joining NATO was we were all in this together, we will defend each other, and we made this deal. Ukraine gave up all of its nuclear weapons, gave them all to Russia, to the then Soviet, well, it was to Russia, with those accords. I think it was Copenhagen Accords or something like that. And on the promise that Russia would leave them alone. And we were basically signatories to that too. And we would come to Ukraine's defense. Now we're looking at 1914 if we were to follow through on that, where everybody was committed to everybody else. Nobody wanted to fight, but they had to because of these treaties. I mean, there's so many different scenarios we can work through our minds right now of what might happen from here on out. But I'm not sure it's going to stop at Eastern Ukraine.
And that's a huge what if. And Putin is a huge wild card. And,
why now?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, there's legacy building if you're an ego-driven leader like Putin famously is.
I had this weird feeling he's sick.
I don't know. That's a rumor, that he's working on the legacy now instead of later. But I don't know. These are speculative guesses.
He obviously saw weakness in the West, because he wouldn't have done this. He might have done it any time.
I mean, right. People will say, "Oh, is it because Trump's out of office and Putin's in and Biden's in office?"
Yeah.
I mean, was Trump tough on Putin? I would argue no. There are signs that he was impeached because he was not tough on the Russians.
Right, but we found a lot of that was not true, so we don't know.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that Putin took the Crimea during Obama's administration. Now he's taking the Ukraine during Biden's administration. I'm trying to figure out, is this connected in some way with our relationship with Europe, the strength of NATO? I mean, these countries in Europe have not been putting in their required amount of support to NATO. They've stripped their military down to nothing. I mean, Great Britain can't even get a capital ship to sea anymore that doesn't break down.
I mean, it's not the days of Churchill.
It certainly isn't. As we're sitting here our recording is sitting on top of 3 books from Winston Churchill's history of the Second World War, and one of them is Their Finest Hour. So, yeah, it's kind of symbolic today.
Yes. And you could say, what would Churchill do? But we just don't know. I mean,
fight on the beaches, fight in the hills. Yeah, we shall never give up. But is the Ukraine worth fighting for?
I mean, it's not a NATO nation, right? So there's not that instant, we've got to back them up.
It's not a a classic democracy. It's corrupt as hell. I don't know. Do we say we only defend you if you're a kind of country we like, or do we say you're too far away, we're not going to commit ourselves on the other side of the world? I mean,
we defended Kuwait, right?
Yes, we did.
So I don't know. Again, these are geopolitical questions that there are far more qualified people to answer. But it is fascinating.
Yeah,
to
but
see
they're arguing amongst themselves too. I mean,
right.
It's not like there's this unity of we've got to do this right now. I mean, I don't even see a real plan. It's sort of in reaction.
Well, right. And we had time knowing that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that this is so new that any plan may still be being worked out.
Right. Well, we can certainly, what we do know is Silicon Valley and the tech world. And we're starting to see the tech world reacting to this in interesting ways. And one of them, some of these things are out of their control. They could lose a major source of chips. They could lose a major source of software engineers in the Ukraine. They've lost enormous amounts of value, so that's going to impact, capital investments and all sorts of stuff. In the valley here, the last year has been insane. Just when you thought housing prices couldn't get higher, they were nosebleed heights. Housing prices around here went up 30% last year. I mean, houses. When I was in 7th, 8th grade, I was looking at houses around here that cost $20,000.
Speaking of the time of Churchill.
And I remember my old man saying, "Yeah, it's probably too late to get into real estate because the prices have gone up." Luckily, they bought some houses right before that. Those houses are going for $3 million. A year ago, they were $2 million. I mean, you start getting used to this sort of fantasy world where the numbers aren't even real anymore. You couldn't even count some of these numbers, in a year, counting every second. So do housing prices finally fall around here?
I mean, they may. And a lot of agents, real estate agents, when I do these housing stories, tell me that the housing market is fueled by stock options here in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And if these companies are losing, in some cases, hundreds of billions of dollars in stock market value, the option prices are, dropping as well.
So
and
you don't say, well, it was $2 million and there's a food fight going on between other people who want to buy, and it's up to $3 million now, but why not?
But if there's...
It'll just keep going up. Let's buy because it's going to keep climbing.
That's what people thought before 2008.
Oh, yes, they did.
And we saw tech stock prices go down then, and the value of housing dropped. And we may see that again if we head into a significant economic downturn.
Yeah.
I mean, we're at war now, right? So everything is cloudy, and that is what the markets don't want to see.
Yep.
And so it's likely, given history, that we will see a downturn for a little while at least, while things like food and gas and everything else is more expensive. So people may trench in a little bit and say, okay, I'm not going to put that extra bid in on the house. And that's what would gradually lower the housing market here.
Now, let me play devil's advocate because, writing the history of Silicon Valley, the 60s were a boom time for the Valley because war's good for technology companies.
I mean, sometimes, but the 60s, the
I
technology was a little different.
When the Vietnam War ended and the Apollo program ended, basically simultaneously, the Valley went into its biggest slump in its history.
But that's because the tech was geared towards helping the military and helping the space program.
Yeah, but you and I can go out here at Lockheed Industrial Park and see that a lot of the Valley's still geared towards, the military and that sort of thing.
I don't know. The giant Lockheed offices in Sunnyvale are now Facebook buildings.
Oh, I know.
That tells you where the
all
tech
those other black box buildings out there.
There are still some, and certainly there's still Palantir. There's still companies that are very secretly dealing with the government.
Right.
But
not as much.
Right. And so it's a different technology industry, and it hasn't had a war in a while.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see where we go in the next weeks, if indeed this lasts.
Now, if I was a company, I'd be especially concerned about cyber warfare.
Absolutely.
Because they can just take down the whole grid, in theory, or take down individual companies.
And that's what these companies are watching for. Right. Starting now, starting today, that's their big focus.
So are you out there covering this story today?
That's where I'm leaving after we finish taping, is to see what they're watching and what they're trying to find.
I would imagine.
So I'll tell you next week.
Okay. Well, that's it for now, folks. You can find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week, I hope. Bye-bye.